Well, advocates take on a variety of roles in their involvement with a vulnerable person with disability, and these reflect the variety of needs that a person with disability might have. Sometimes advocates might take on several roles at once. Can you comment on this?
It's an interesting dance, you might say. We in all our relationships, we often have a starting point, and then it evolves. And I think these kind of long-term, committed advocacy relationships have some of those same features. That there's an urgent need we might start with, and we think this is perhaps where all we need to do, but then we discover more. And so our role might depend on the manner in which we see the needs of the person, our accuracy about seeing the needs and vulnerability of another person, and therefore the role we need to play. Certainly some of the roles are very, what we call instrumental. They're really practical. There are things that need to be done, secure a tenancy agreement, or, secure better food for someone, look at a different or better service for someone. So they're kind of, a better doctor that will listen to the person. So all sorts of kind of practical things. So they're kind of little basket of instrumental needs. And then there's this other basket that has more to do with our relationship, the impact that this relationship brings to the person being wanted and needed and belonging and companionship. And so some people have needs there very much so, and we'll see the advocate as an important feature of their relational life, and that directly meets a need around that. And so between those two things, there's a multitude of roles that an advocate might play and give emphasis to certain things. It's almost like the seasons, you might say. There's a time to do this and there's a time to do that. But there are some roles that endure. For instance, some people might start out being like a great aunt to a young woman. A more mature age woman is an advocate for a younger woman. And yet other things arise and she sees that something else is needed here, and therefore her role shifts. But she probably will always have that older aunt feature to the relationship, even though she's busy doing some things that aunts wouldn't necessarily need to do. So it's a kind of fluid state, and it's quite a wonderful thing when you realise the advocate begins to know the needs of the person they represent. Often we call the protege, that person who's in this relationship that helps this person to flourish and for their needs to be met, and where the advocate sees those needs better than anybody else, who's got to know the person to predict their kind of the quirkiness or the unique special features of the person that mean that I understand what she really needs, and then to represent those needs so accurately to other parties who obviously sometimes have a very short-sighted or myopic view of a person, are restricted to some kind of service need area, or that she's a nuisance or her behaviour needs dealing with, compared to the advocate who sees the whole person as a unique and special and gifted person. So just a completely different way of doing that. And so that's a very special thing for an advocate to realise, that they play such a role and that they're needed, in a sense, in that relation, to know that they can't turn their back on someone who needs them so much. And so the advocate grows as well. This is often a reciprocal relationship where the interests of both parties get met, where an advocate gets to act as a moral activist on behalf of another person. Now, who gets to do that? We often think Nelson Mandela is the only one who can be a moral activist, but when in a relationship like this, the advocate gets to be that. They'll probably never do that for themselves, but here's a chance to do it for someone else. And so when we talk to advocates, they often say, I get more out of this relationship than I think the protege does. I've learned more about life and what's important and what people's needs are and how the world can treat them. And I think I have grown here more than the protege has. We've heard Jean Vanier that any relationship that isn't reciprocal probably can't be sustained. This isn't just a one-way street. Advocates will get plenty from the friendship, companionship and love that their protege gives them, and not to underestimate that particular role and its part in their relationship. It's quite lovely to see.
And I suppose there's some roles that can't be taken on by paid staff, like the role of being a friend, a trusted friend, a role of being a substitute for a family member, for example.
That's right. Yes, Bob. You can't pay for care. You can't say, if I pay you a certain amount, now will you care? And certainly staff can be caring, but that's because of the heart they bring. But their paid relationship limits it. It means that their relationship is controlled by a third party. What they do, when they do it, what they say, even whether they're allowed to relate to the person beyond their service role, is all dictated by a third party. So while they might be caring and friendly and warm, they can't be a friend. Friends aren't paid. By definition, you can't be both paid and be a friend. You can be friendly. And so these are kind of confusions, you might say, that many staff have to kind of deal with. And certainly some staff grow to love people, but their love can't be truly expressed until they step outside that paid role. Whereas in an unpaid role, you might say the two people involved are completely free to work out the dimensions of the relationship. How often will we meet? Where will we go? What will we talk about? No other third party controls that. The relationship is free. It's up to them to use that time together. They decide all of those dimensions and what they will do in it. And in that sense, the relationship is open-ended. And we've seen even advocates who say, I want this person now to live with me, I'll provide them a home. And advocates who can express love towards the protege. And they mean that in the clearest kind of dedication to each other. Whereas it would be kind of awkward to say, you know, for staff who are paid to say, I do this because I love the people. But hang on, you're paid. What does that mean? And so it's a misunderstanding of the nature of love and the nature of that freely given commitment that needs to be made. And that's also the strength of this kind of advocacy, that it's not dependent on payment, because payment implies a coercion. Will you relate to this person if we pay you? And, well, no, this relationship is too valuable to be paid for. To pay for it would diminish the value of the relationship. It's too valuable. You couldn't pay for this, and therefore it's free. There's no cost.
And it's really about relationships being one of those really important things that we mean when we talk about the good things in life.
It certainly is, yeah. And it's the things that devalued people often miss out on. Often their lives are surrounded by paid relationships. As well-meaning and as warmth and caring as sometimes they are, they're limited. You know, people will inevitably leave and go and do other things, get transferred, and so that can be injuring to people when they're relying on all of their relationships through payment. It leaves them very vulnerable to the passage of what we call a relationship circus. And here's a relationship, though, where commitment is the major basis for it, and the potential then that this is long-term, even lifelong, and the kind of protective nature of that, the security that a person can have to know that there's a person in my life who will never leave me. It brings reassurance and also helps that person. It's like an insurance against the passage, the inevitable passage of paid people through their life. You can come and go, but I'll still be here and I'll never leave you. And that the person can actually deal with the passage of those paid people because, yeah, but I know that this person will always be there. So you guys can come and go. I have you. And so in a sense, that passage is not necessarily as injurious. They may miss people, but it doesn't leave the injury that a total reliance on paid relationships would otherwise bring.
So that relationship with an advocate directly reduces the dependence that some people with disability have on service systems, even though they might continue to need services, but the dependence is...
Absolutely. Now, there's a place for service, but now it might be discrete and it might be well targeted towards those things where a person needs, practical support to learn a new skill or get a new job, and rather than a kind of whole of life enveloping of the person, because we've got a freely given and a natural relationship that takes care of that. Of course, we would hope too that advocacy relationships widen the circle of support and friendships that people might have into the family of the advocate, into the friends and into the community that the advocate has. Welcome this person in, I want you to meet. And that means embedding people into naturally occurring valued social roles, relationship roles, community roles, and a lessening requirement that be done by paid people, which means that if service is needed, then it's well targeted and probably a whole lot cheaper.